here we are in the middle colonies. This is the other region. So we already talked about up here, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. Those are your New England colonies. Here we have what you would consider the middle colonies. People actually call them the middle colonies. As you learned from some of your reports this week, is that this is often termed the breadbasket colonies. That's because there is a lot more grain and whatnot grown there. Um, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, and New York make up your middle colonies. You can see East Jersey, West Jersey. It's all New Jersey, okay? And we are going to talk briefly about the Dutch. I know we didn't cover this in class, and I'm not going to test you on it, so don't freak out, but there's a couple cool things about this that I wanted to let you know, just in case you ever go to New York. First of all, the crazy part is if you look at how much the Dutch, because the Dutch actually established in New York first. Dutch are big traders at this time. Slave traders, they trade goods there all over the sea. So it makes sense that they set up a port in New York to just work out of. But what they end up doing is they end up buying the island of Manhattan for $24, what was equivalent to about $24 and a few odds and ends, beads, pots, things like that. And the reason I think that's kind of cool is because if you think about how much a studio apartment in Manhattan goes for today, you would just, it's such a great deal. Imagine you could go buy the entire island of Manhattan for $24. That'd be a great deal if you could time travel. The other cool thing that I wanted to mention, just how the Dutch were able to influence the cities, the boroughs that they established of Brooklyn and Harlem. Clearly, if you look at these spellings, they do look more Dutch, and they have been changed today. But Brooklyn and Harlem are boroughs in New York that I believe you've heard of. Also, they are responsible for building Wall Street, and really it was a little dirt wall where they used to take pigs, sheep, and different goods, and they would actually go and trade those goods along the wall. It was also set up, that wall originally right here was also set up, here's the wall. It was set up as kind of a barrier between Native Americans over here and the Dutch colony. So where all of the money and trading and everything happens today originally started off in trading pigs and sheep. How did the Dutch lose control? Well, first of all, the Dutch governor does not do a great job. The people living in New York who are Dutch, German, English, they don't really like him. They think he's a bit harsh. And what ends up happening is the King of England gives this land to his brother. By the way, he doesn't really have a right to give this land to his brother because the Dutch control it, but he does anyways because he's a king. So King Charles gives the land to his brother, the Duke of York, hence the name New York. All right. Um, and what ends up happening is the Duke of York has some ships. They go into New York Harbor and they demand that the Dutch give them control of New York. And the Dutch don't like the governor, and so they really kind of look at each other, look at the ships, and say, not a problem, cool, come on in. Can we still continue to trade? And the Duke of York says, yeah, you can continue to trade. They're like, great, have at it. New York is yours. And that's how it became an English colony. So the Dutch got it for $24, and the English got it just by flexing their muscles a little bit. This is just a picture of New York Harbor. Obviously, it looks a little bit different today, but it's still kind of cool to see just the development that they had around there. Obviously, notice all of the ships, major trade area. So actually what we talked about was Pennsylvania, Delaware, and William Penn. The one thing I pointed out was you know him probably from the cereal bars or oats, things like that. He didn't invent the cereal bar. He didn't invent Quaker oats. They just kind of use a little bit of his image to encapsulate that and use it as their brand. You can often see that going back to what I originally said, that if the middle colonies are known as the breadbasket, you have cereal bars and oats. Those are wheat products. Obviously, put it together. So what ends up happening is King Charles II is in major debt to William Penn's father. And William Penn's father actually helped King Charles keep his throne. If you can hear that in the background, that's the Blue Angels. That's great. So King Charles' throne. And so what ends up happening is William Penn's father dies before King Charles can repay that debt. In the meantime, William Penn here has become a Quaker, which is considered crazy at the time because Quakers don't bow down to kings. Quakers don't fight in wars. Quakers don't need priests telling them how to read the Bible or how to worship. So he's very much of an outcast in England. And he is looking for a place to establish and kind of build this perfect city. And he's going to obviously want Quakers to come with him. King Charles is really looking to get rid of this guy, and he has to pay off a debt. So he says, win win. I give William Penn some land, and now I no longer have to see them. So that is how William Penn gets a hold of this charter for land. And he will be responsible for actually buying the land from the natives rather than killing the natives and taking it. And he will establish a safe haven for many different religions. So the Quakers are also known as the Society of Friends. I mentioned this also if you've heard of the Friends School in the Mission area. It's a Quaker school. Does that mean that everybody who goes to the Friends School is a Quaker? Absolutely not. Just like everybody who goes to a Catholic school is not Catholic. So anytime you see anything with the Friends, it's a Quaker school. They believed in abolition. We already talked about this abolition right here. No slavery. They are trying to get rid of slavery. They don't believe in it. They think it's a bad thing. Prohibition. Prohibition is the outlaw of making, selling, or consuming alcohol. They do not believe in alcohol. This will take until the 1920s to actually go into effect, so they're kind of new on the idea. Universal suffrage is something else we talked about. We're talking about everybody can vote. Suffrage means the right to vote. Universal means everybody. The women who were fighting for the right to vote in the 1800s and 1900s are often called the suffragettes. And also you have pacifism. They are pacifists, meaning they are not going to fight. Does that mean they can't be drafted for the war? No, they can be, but they can also be conscientious objectors, which means they will not necessarily carry a gun, and they would be given a duty such as a medic or a mechanic or things like that, supportive roles in the military. So these are all ideas that for colonial America and for England and Europe at the time are outrageous. Many people believe slavery is a great thing. Of course, they've been drinking since, forever. Obviously, universal suffrage, the fact that women could vote, please, that's a white man's duty. And fighting wars, I mean, that's what they do. A lot of their society is based upon fighting. Think of how many times you've heard about England fighting the French or England fighting the Spanish. It's going to continue on. What are some Quaker religious beliefs? Not much that I really need to add here. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Quakers don't need the preachers, right? They can speak to God. They can read the Bible on their own. So if you were to go into a Quaker service, you would be practicing a meditating style and have that kind of experience. You wouldn't necessarily be listening to a homily or somebody, talk about different verses in the Bible. You could do that on your own. If you wanted to speak or if you were touched or had something that you wanted to say, you could say that. And women could say it too. Remember, Anne Hutchinson was kicked out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony for thinking this. And the Quakers themselves are actually establishing a colony based on one of these ideas. The other thing is that if you were to go to a Quaker service, they often, if they are reaching meditation, sometimes they would just be so overcome with the power or have such a great experience, they might tremble or shake. That's giving them the name Quakers, supposedly. And of course, the asterisks down here do tell you that unless you went to Rhode Island, Quakers could not go anywhere else because they were so weird compared to the very strict Puritans who relied on the preachers standing up on the pulpit telling them what to think or to say or to feel. So early rebellions, we're going to go over this really quickly. This is just a picture of the Stono rebellions. You can see over here is a palm tree. It was a little bit more exotic. That's because the Stono rebellion will take place in South Carolina. We're only going to focus on a couple rebellions. That does not mean there aren't many more, but I just want to give you a feeling of the fact that it wasn't all great. It wasn't all, we're going to have these great plantations. Some people are going to die from dysentery. We're going to have some witch trials. There was rebellion. There was unrest, and even early on in the 1600s and early 1700s. The first person we're going to talk about is Bacon's Rebellion. It is led by Nathaniel Bacon. Yes, he is related to Sir Francis Bacon, a scientist. Like distant cousin or something like that. He actually is kind of what you would consider an upper middle class free man. He does own some land, but he takes on the poor man's cause What's happening is, and this is actually happening in the Virginia colony, VA for Virginia. In the Virginia colony, Native Americans are raiding the frontier. That means the area that is further away from the city. Many people, if you are poor, you can't afford to buy land. So what you do is you go further out into the frontier, into the wilderness, and you start hacking out a living and then hope to someday maybe buy land closer to town or maybe just make a living on the frontier. Well, the Indians feel that the poor whites are encroaching on their hunting grounds, and rightly so. And so they start attacking these settlers or these colonists who are coming to the frontier land. Well, the Virginia government does nothing to support them. Governor Barclay, the leader of the Virginia colony at the time, refuses to send militia to protect these free men living in the frontier, kind of saying, well, it's your fault that you live so close to them, and we don't want to start a war with the Native Americans. Well, Nathaniel Bacon gets really ticked off, decides that he is going to take matters into his own hands if Governor Barclay of Virginia does nothing, and so he establishes a militia. This militia is made up of poor farmers, indentured servants, and some slaves, which will lead to one of the outcomes using the indentured servants. Unfortunately, he takes his anger out on the Native Americans first. There are multiple tribes living in or near the Virginia territory. He actually attacks the innocent, peaceful tribe, not the tribe that was responsible for leading these different attacks on the white colonists on the frontier. So he attacks and kills innocent Native Americans, and then takes his anger even further and goes and burns some of Jamestown. Yes, the Jamestown colony where John Rolfe and John Smith and everybody were. So he goes and burns that down in protest of like, see, you've done nothing for us. Um, Finally, in response, Governor Barclay realizes this is a major issue. We need to take care of this. And so what he ends up doing is agreeing to a lot of what Bacon is asking for. So if you go over here, it says Bacon issued a manifesto declaration of the people. He wanted the Native Americans removed, and he wanted the poor farmers to be protected from the Native Americans. He wanted the wealthy landowners of Virginia to accept ownership and give more rights and take care of the poor people, the poorer farmers. And he also wanted taxes lowered. So, of course, it always goes back to taxes, right? So what ends up happening, this goes on for a little while. Eventually, Governor Barclay agrees to a lot of these requests. And once he agrees to it, he feels that Nathaniel Bacon still needs to be punished. I mean, he did burn down Jamestown. Not all of Jamestown, but part of Jamestown. Some of the buildings were burnt. So he does lead an attack there. So what they do is they send out, Governor Barclay sends out his own military or militia to go find Bacon, but Bacon actually will die a little bit before that, before he can be captured, and he dies of dysentery supposedly. And also a few of his followers that were following him were also hanged. So that's not a very good ending for them, but it is a good ending if he were able to remain alive, because what it ends up happening is the rich are still going to control Virginia. That's not a surprise there, but they do support the poor man's expansion onto frontier land, into Indian territory. They lower taxes. Everybody loves lower taxes, right? And also, because the indentured servants were part of Nathaniel Bacon's revolt, they decide we don't want to have to deal with these white indentured servants anymore. Let's just import our labor from Africa. And so they start relying even more so on slave labor. They had been doing this since the Jamestown colony anyways, but now it just was multiplied.